claim that Jesus claimed to be God, it has to be explicit where he says, I'm God, and he never does. Of course, Christians don't know this. I mean, I don't blame them. They've never been taught these things. They can't be taught these things because if they are taught these things, it destroys these arguments about the church, these various churches claiming that Jesus not only is God, but that Jesus claimed to be God. And that's what's not true. He was said to be God by other people who spoke about him, and especially the Romans almost 300 years later. So any textual argument that they want to bring up to claim that Jesus claimed to be God, and I say to them, but it has to be explicit. It can't be something where it sounds like it, or you can read into it that that's what he means,
Right.
which would be an interpretation. It has to be explicit where he says, I'm God, and he never does.
Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon.
Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a PJTN podcast, and I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore. On today's podcast, we are continuing our conversation about the rise of the replacement theology threat and God's eternal covenant that he made with Israel. During our last podcast, we discussed the role early Christianity played in fueling hatred of the Jews, especially under Constantine. But today, I have invited back to the program Rabbinit Yaffa Batya Costa, founder and CEO of Le Anusim, back on the Proclaiming Justice podcast to continue our conversation about anti-Semitism and the role Christianity has played historically in fueling this ancient hatred. So we shouldn't be surprised when we see it on social media. I want to remind our audience, if you missed the last episode of our conversation with Yaffa, you must go back. You've got to listen to it. You can find it on our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org. You can also locate it at salemsoneplace.com, as well as all the other platforms that you use to access your favorite podcasts. So Yaffa, thank you for joining us again on Proclaiming Justice. Today, I want to continue our conversation with you about the rise of Christian anti-Semitism, especially on social media, with some of the leading anti-Semites like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. Yaffa, I'm so grateful to have you back on the show.
Oh, thank you, Laurie. I really enjoy doing this podcast with you. I hope it's informative for your audience, and I would like to say that when we say Christians, I am trying to get myself into this habit as well, to say either biblical Christians or Roman Christians, because there's a huge, huge difference in what people believe. And the biblical Christians go by the Bible, the Christian Bible, what they call the New Testament. And the better of them, the really great ones, have been taught or learned on their own or however they got it, to read it in context, which is really what people have to do, because Jesus was a Jew and Paul was a Jew and the disciples were Jews, and the only one that's mentioned in the New Testament that where there's some question 50-50 like is Luke, but all the rest obviously are Jews. So if people can't read it in context of the Judaism of its day and the historical context of what was going on in that day with the Roman occupation of Judea,
Right.
It makes it very difficult to read it and understand it, as we say, in context. But the real trouble came almost 300 years later with the Romans, and what the Romans did, and I call it hijacking Pauline Christianity. That's another term people use for it. Instead of biblical Christianity, they can call it nascent, which means earliest form, or they can call it Pauline Christianity, because We do think it started with Paul, the 7 authentic letters of Paul, not the other ones that aren't really Paul. They wrote like it was writing from Paul, but it wasn't. Okay.
Right.
So, but there's a huge difference between that and what was written in those documents and what happened later with the Nicene Council. We've talked a little bit about that. So a lot of this is happening on social media. And we mentioned Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. They are huge influencers on social media. They have a major following, although I've heard recently that their numbers are going down. And I don't know if that's true because I don't track their numbers, but that's what I've seen people saying on X, that their audience is going down. So maybe people are trying to figure it out and research some of this stuff on their own and make decisions. I don't know, but that's what I've heard.
So let me just add to that for our audience. I want to give you some historical context from my perspective. And this is my understanding and studying the scriptures from a Hebraic perspective. And those of you who've been following me for a long time know that I require my students to go back and prove what they believe through a cloud of 2 to 3 witnesses. And those 2 to 3 witnesses that they have to prove, if they're going to, adopt a concept in the New Testament scriptures, they need to substantiate that in the Torah, the writings, and the prophets, because a matter is confirmed before a cloud of 2 to 3 witnesses. And years ago, when I first started to study with my teacher, Linda Semler, she was the first person to introduce me to this way of study. And before, I was like any other Christian. I would go to church, show up in church on Sunday, listen to the pastor's sermon, and whatever he said, I believed it, and I didn't question it. Well, it forced me to really make sure that what I was being taught is accurate. And this is what's so important. The accuracy of the understanding of the text of scripture is so critically important, especially now, because now we see the word being used against God's elect or his chosen people or his covenant that he made with Israel. And that's why, as Yaffa just said, you have people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens who do not know their Bible. They might quote a verse here and there to substantiate their position, but typically those verses are taken out of context. We have to study the Bible in its proper historical context. If we don't, and also from the Hebraic perspective, because remember, we serve a Jewish, or not Jewish, let me correct that, Hebrew God. And God made a covenant with the Hebrews, starting with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And it is an eternal covenant that is everlasting. And so if that's true, then everything that we study, everything that we read, we need to read from that understanding. And so I want to encourage our audience. I'm getting some conflicting statements from people who profess to be Christians through my social media feeds. And so I'm trying to help, although they're a little upset with what I'm communicating, but I'm trying to help them to put what they believe in its proper context. And so that's why we're here today, Yaffa. That's why I've invited you back. We're going to talk about again the replacement theology, how it has affected Christianity and the relationship with Israel and the Jews, how the church sees the Jews in modern time. And so we're going to start with the book of John. And Yaffa, you've done some research for us. And so let's talk about John 1:14.
Okay, so the first 18 verses of the Gospel of John are called the prologue. And one thing about the prologue is some of the Christian scholars, and when I say Christian scholars, I mean the modern day Christian scholars, think that that was added later, those first 18 verses, and that the Gospel of John actually starts at verse 19. So that's one factor. And of course, people should be reading these verses that we're talking about for themselves, maybe later, maybe jotting down the chapter and verse now while we're talking, and then read it on their own later. Okay, so verse 14 says, and the Word was made flesh, and it's talking about Jesus. Okay, but these Gospels were written in Greek. All the New Testament was written in Greek except for one book, which is called the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. We'll talk about that some other time. So this is written in Greek, and I've got people who claim that the proper translation from the Greek into English of that verse is the Word was made manifest in the flesh. Now, in Greek, the word for word is logos, but Jews would understand that as Torah, because God created the world using Torah, okay, which is his word. So if the word was made manifest in the flesh, and in context of Judaism of its day, okay, that means the Torah was made manifest in the flesh. And what that means, people could see this man and his righteousness and his Torah observance, because that is what was made manifest. That's what you could see. And that's what being manifest means. But when that word manifest is not there in the English, and it just says the word was made flesh, and the word, and they interpret the earlier verses as, and the word was made by God and the word was God. That's also a poor translation. It's better, more accurate, I should say, translated, and the word was godly or godlike. Okay, and that's what was made manifest in the flesh. Well, it's talking about the Torah. So that's the Hebrew context that is hard for people to get on their own unless they're taught, and they're not being taught that in the majority of the churches. That's the issue. Now, the next one that people, and these are verses that people are using with me, because I do the same thing on social media, Laurie, is I say, don't tell me your opinion. Okay, your opinion is fine as your opinion. But if you want me to accept what you're saying, show me chapter and verse. Show me where that's written in the text. I want to talk about the text. Not that I want to insult them about what their opinion is. People have opinions. They have a right to their opinions. They have a right to their beliefs. Everybody does. And to free speech, everyone does. But if they're going to try to convince me or influence me to share that belief that they are saying they believe, then I need them to show it to me in the text, like you, when you say, 2 or 3 witnesses. So now here's another example of something that's taken out of context and misinterpreted now, not mistranslated, but misinterpreted. And it's at John 10, verse 30, same thing, Gospel of John, chapter 10, verse 30. And they quote this. A lot of people quote this to me. The Father and I are one. Okay. Now, there are 2 things I say about that. Two examples of why it can't be translated to mean, interpreted. It can be interpreted to mean the Father and I are one and the same, because that's how they're interpreting it. Okay, so one example is in the book of Genesis. It talks about a man and a woman, man and a wife becoming one flesh. Well, obviously that's a metaphor, because they don't merge and become literally one flesh, and now they only have 2 hands and 2 feet and 2 legs and 1 head, because they've, kind of immersed with each other. There's just one now. It's silly, So it's a metaphor for one in closeness, one in agreement, one in accord. There's a lot of ways it could be translated, interpreted, to mean a different kind of one, what that word would mean. But if you go down in John, Gospel of John, to chapter 17, it's even more clear when Jesus is praying for his disciples that, quote unquote, they would be one as I and the Father are one. Now, it's using the same word, one, And the same kind of relationship that Jesus has with the Father, he's praying that the disciples would have that they would be one as I and the Father are one.
Mhm.
So it can't be one and the same.
Mhm.
Not in context, it can't.
Yeah. So I want to go back. I ordered a book, a New Testament scripture that is called the Aramaic English New Testament, and it was it's published by Nitzari Press, and there's a Rabbi Gabriel Roth who wrote the commentary in this. So he had, with regards to First John or John 1:14, he has that word written as the miltha, Miltha, and the miltha became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, the glory as the only begotten, who is from the Father, who is full of grace and truth. Now, that word miltha refers to, like what you said, manifestation of the Ruach HaKodesh within Mashiach. The physical body of Mashiach is not the word of Yahweh, but his words and actions demonstrate the will and word of Yahweh, which upholds observance of Torah.
Right, that's just what I was saying. It's the
Mhm.
observance of Torah that's made manifest in the flesh. And by the way, that's true for any tzaddik, any righteous person.
Mhm.
So I don't want to seem like I'm saying I'm putting Jesus down or making him less than what he was, but I'm just saying there are other people who have reached that level. He's not the only one in the Hebrew Bible anyway.
Mhm. Yeah. I
Okay.
wanted to just point that out to show the connection of what you said. And
Mm-hmm.
here is the author of this New Testament scripture who is also referring to Mashiach and his observance of Torah.
Of Torah, right. And by the way, the next verse and the thing about his glory, I've read AI. I asked AI about it. You know, AI takes its information from all different kinds of sources. And AI said that that verse was a scribal comment in a border,
Mhm.
so to speak, and then it was added to the text.
Mm.
So that was added in later. It was initially a scribal comment, a comment of a scribe that was writing a Torah scroll, and that was the scribe writing a comment in the outline, the border, you know, the thing around the text. There was
Mhm.
empty space because
Right, right.
they have found a lot of papyri and a lot of you know, scrolls over the centuries.
Mhm.
Okay, and that's where a lot of the modern scholars are coming from in talking about, you know, what's in the text was originally in the text and what is not something that was originally in the text and added later.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm. Very good. Okay. So,
Okay. And then we have John 20. After Jesus shows his wounds to Thomas, the disciple Thomas, Thomas exclaims, and that word exclaims is a pretty good, you know, word to use there. He exclaims, "My Lord and my God." And that's like somebody today saying, OMG, you know, oh my
mhm.
God, right? But people read into this that he's saying Jesus is my Lord and my God. Well, he doesn't say that. That's not explicit. He doesn't say, Jesus, you're my Lord and my God. You see?
Right.
That's when it would mean that. But if those words are not there, that Thomas is claiming that Jesus is his Lord and his God, I mean, I would even go along with it that he might have been calling him Lord.
Mhm.
Okay. But he can't be calling him God because, again, nowhere in John's gospel is Jesus explicitly
Mhm.
said to be God. And by the way, the other point I want to make about John's gospel, I should have said at the beginning, is that all the gospels were written anonymously, so we don't know who any of these people are who wrote them. The names were all added later.
Interesting.
None of the four Gospels we know who wrote them. The modern scholars know this based on Christian history, the historians Eusebius and others, and I don't want to say it came out of Eusebius, I'm just using him as an example, but the earliest historians of Christianity called them the evangelists because they were sharing good news.
Mm-hmm.
So these four documents were called the writings of the evangelists or something general like that because they didn't actually know who wrote them. And then later they put names on them to help to distinguish between them.
Interesting. Yeah, this is this is an important point to make, and this is again why we use our method of 2 to 3 witnesses in the Tanakh to make sure that what we are reading is in alignment with the Word, with the Scriptures.
Right.
And so you bring up a very, very good point. In fact, I've recently, I think I've mentioned to you, I've recently stumbled upon Bart Ehrman, who is a New Testament scholar. And I do believe he still is a professor at University of North Carolina, is it?
I think so, yeah.
He's done a lot of research about the historical, who Jesus was historically from a Hebraic perspective. And he's very quite interesting, very well read, well respected. But yeah, very good.
It's fascinating stuff. It's very, very fascinating. Now, the last one I think I mentioned last week, but it bears repeating in case somebody didn't hear last week's program. The fourth example, okay, of what some people on social media, and I'm usually on X, so when I say social media, I'm usually talking about Twitter or X. The fourth one, and sometimes they come out with this one first. It's like going for the jugular. And so they quote John chapter 8, verses 48 through 59, but the Iker is where Jesus is claiming to have said, before Abraham came to be, I am. Now, the way the scholars talk about the Gospel of John, what they say is it was written in High Greek, very High Greek, okay? And so he wouldn't have been a fisherman from the Galilee, okay? Meaning uneducated kind of thing.
So again, we're talking about the Apostle John, and this
we
is
don't
the
even
name,
know.
right? This is the name that people have given to these scriptures, but we don't know for sure who the author.
Well, actually, most of the Christian scholars, the modern ones, widely agree that the Gospel of John was not written by the Apostle John. There are a lot of Johns in the New Testament. So what they say is, again, it's by an anonymous author or a community in the late first century, very late first century, even crossing over into the early second century. And the way they get that is they point to the text of the Gospel of John, its sophisticated Greek, its philosophical knowledge, its detailed geography of Judea. Those are things they use as evidence that the author was not a Galilean fisherman, like the Apostle John. The Apostle John is the fisherman. But likely a very well-educated Greek-speaking Christian. And so it was written directly in Greek, not a translation from Aramaic or Hebrew or any of those languages. And it was later attributed to the Apostle John. So when you say Apostle John, yes, the church later attributed it to the Apostle John, but modern scholars reject that, totally out of hand reject it for the reasons I just mentioned. Now, the other thing is, did he know Hebrew at all? This person who wrote the Gospel of John, did he know Hebrew, and had he read the Hebrew Bible? Because when he says this, or he has Jesus saying, these are all alleged, Jesus allegedly said, because we don't really know what Jesus actually said, because Jesus never wrote anything. We don't have anything written by him directly. So it's an allegation that he said it, and Christians use that. And what are they drawn to? It's pretty obvious. They're drawn to the name that God gave to Moses at the burning bush. When Moses asked God, what name shall I tell the people, who sent me? And that name gets translated in Christian Bibles all the time as, my name is I am. But to be honest with you, you can't translate the Hebrew that way because there's no present tense of the verb to be. So it cannot mean that. Okay. It can only be the verb to be can only be translated into English as I was or I shall be. Now, in the Hebrew Bibles, of course, the Hebrew Bible has Genesis, has Moses at the burning bush, whatever, Exodus, whatever. And it is translated, I shall be as I shall be. So it makes me wonder if this person who later is called John, and they later say he's the Apostle John, the modern scholars say, no, it couldn't have been him. I wonder if he even ever read the book. And that's what they point to in saying that Jesus is essentially saying he's God, and that he's the person or entity or whatever you want to call it that met with Moses at the burning bush. By using those two words, I am, that's what it's referring to. And so people on X have been mainly using that, and then they'll get into other things, but they come at me with this one first. Well, Jesus said, I am, And I know what they mean. And so I talk a little bit about the burning bush and the word in the Hebrew, and it couldn't have been translated that way into English of what God said to Moses at the burning bush, because there's no present tense in the Hebrew for the verb to be, rather, for the verb to be. It's weird. Laurie, if I want to say in Hebrew, I am here, okay, I'm here right now, but I am here, it's two words in Hebrew, ani, po. There's no am in Hebrew. That's what I'm saying. So God could not have said, I am. It doesn't exist in the Hebrew language. You see, and of course, Christians don't know this. I mean, I don't blame them. They've never been taught these things. They can't be taught these things. Okay, because if they are taught these things, it destroys these arguments about the church, these various churches claiming that Jesus not only is God, but that Jesus claimed to be God. And that's what's not true. He was said to be God by other people who spoke about him, and especially the Romans almost 300 years later. Okay. So any argument that they want to bring up, and I've got quite a few more, but any textual argument that they want to bring up to claim that Jesus claimed to be God, and I say to them, but it has to be explicit. It can't be something where it sounds like it, or you can read into it that that's what he means, which would be an interpretation. It has to be explicit, where he says, I'm God. And he never does. He's never quoted as saying that anywhere in the New Testament.
In fact, he was constantly pointing his followers to his Father in heaven.
Right. To God the Father. Exactly. And that's the prayer he used. That's how he starts praying and teaching his disciples how to pray. Our Father, he says our, because he's talking to all Jews. Our Father who art in heaven. One fellow tried to argue with me one time about, well, Jews don't call God their Father. And I said to him, what? Say what? What are you talking about? And he said, well, Jesus, was correcting Judaism, and they never called God their Father, and God is this mean ogre, this person that just wants to punish people. And he went on and on a little bit, and I let him go a little bit, and I came back and I said, well, here are the verses in Ishayahu and whatever else, I don't have it in front of me right now, where in the Hebrew Bible, God is called the Father. and our Father and those kinds of phrases. I mean, it goes all the way back to the Hebrew Bible. So yeah, Jesus was, right in line with all the rest of Judaism on that matter, on
Right.
that issue. And he
Well,
was teaching his disciples to pray that way, to pray to God the Father, not to pray to him. He never asked for prayer.
that's right. So this is interesting because we recently just came off of the High Holy Days, and one of the prayers on Yom Kippur during the Kol Nidre services, it's repeated, "Our Father, our King,"
Right.
when they are praying. So for anybody who would say that the Jews didn't pray that way, that's exactly how they prayed. They
Right.
recognized him as their father and as their king.
Right. And I said that to him, okay, that Jews pray that way today, and they've prayed that way for 2,000 years. I mean, that is Judaism. Okay, that God is three things. God is Father, God is God Almighty, God the Creator, all those terms for God. And he's King of the universe. He's the sovereign of the universe for everybody.
Right.
Some people don't accept him as sovereign. Okay, we understand that. And again, people have freedom. They have the right to their beliefs. But he's called all three things in the Hebrew Bible: Father, God, and sovereign or king. Absolutely.
Yeah. And we've been having all these protests in this country saying we don't want a king. Well, what's interesting is the United States, if we get down to it, and our Judeo-Christian foundation, we do have a king. We both share. That's why the Judeo-Christian values, we both share those values. And unfortunately, we've gone a long way from allowing him to be our king. We've changed as a society. God willing, we're gonna go back. But
well, actually, there was someone who did say that to me, not just to me personally, but put a post out that on the "We Have No King" protest, and that's exactly what they said. But in the United States, we do have a king, but they said it was Jesus. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but here's the thing, and again, that's what they've been taught. But when they talk about Messiah, they are talking about King Messiah. There's two Mashiachs, there's two Messiahs, Ben Yosef and Ben David. Ben David is supposed to be the king Messiah, but according to Obadiah, and I've mentioned this before, they come at roughly the same time. The last verse in Obadiah says, "And saviors or deliverers, okay, will go up to Mount Zion and judge the mountain of Esau." Okay, so they come roughly at the same time, these two. But the one who's called the king, who will be the king of Israel, okay, that Messiah hasn't come yet. And how do we know? Because there are certain things that he has to do. And that's the definition of who he is. He is who he is because of what he does in fulfillment of the prophecies about that King Messiah. Right. So when I say that to Christians, they say, well, you're right. So they'll go with me halfway. But then they'll say, but he's going to come back and do those things. And I say, well, and I agree with them. I go, well, okay, I mean, that's fine. You can speculate that it's going to be him returned, but it might not be, and that's speculation. So why is it Christians are constantly calling him King and King of Israel and King Messiah and all this stuff now? Because he hasn't come back. He didn't come back in that generation like he said he would. Okay. Right. They were expecting him to, but he didn't. So in all these 2,000 years, he didn't come back and he didn't do all those things, and he hasn't yet. So why do Christians demand not only to say he's the King Messiah right now, even though he hasn't done those things, but he wants us to say it and believe in it, us Jews, and get angry with us if we don't.
Well, didn't Jesus even say, when his disciples, he was getting ready to be carried up to heaven, and his disciples asked him, apparently they agreed and believed that he was the Messiah, but there was one thing that he had not fulfilled. And they asked him, will you at this time restore the kingdom back to Israel? And his response to them, it's not for you to know the day or the hour. So he was basically saying the same thing, that no, I mean, I haven't done it. And
Exactly.
so he's making the case for what you are saying, that he didn't do it, and he's talking in a future event when it will happen. But
there are actually three things. There's bringing peace, not just to Israel, but to the whole world.
mhm,
And Jesus is quoted as saying, I did not come to bring peace, but the sword.
mhm,
There's restoring the kingdom to Israel, what you just mentioned.
mhm,
And there's building the third temple, which the temple existed in his day. It hadn't been destroyed yet. It was destroyed 40 years later. So there was a temple in his day, but it was corrupt.
mhm,
So people might say, well, he could have fulfilled that prophecy by eliminating the corruption. And my answer would be, well, yes, he could have, but he didn't. He didn't do that either.
mhm,
So he didn't do anything about the temple. He didn't do anything about bringing peace to the world. He didn't do anything about restoring the kingdom to Israel. Okay.
mhm.
So those are the three main prophecies, and there may be a few other minor ones, but those are the three main ones. And again, to tell people this, it's heartbreaking in a way. I get ambivalent about some of these conversations I have with people, because on the one hand, I don't blame them, because I know they've been taught these things and they haven't been taught the other side of the coin, or
Mhm.
the view. So I know that's a trap they're in, and it's hard to get out of that trap. But on the other hand, I have to tell them the truth. I can't,
That's right. That's right.
go along with stuff that I know not to be true. And they also can't, from a textual point of view, they can't come up with a text that would prove their point.
And see, this was my struggle when I first started to become, when all of this was brought to my attention, and these
Mhm.
things were pointed out, and things that didn't align with what I had been taught and what I had believed. And I had a period of time when I had to really wrestle with what I saw with my own eyes, what I was reading with my own eyes, and reading that and understanding it up against the backdrop of what I had been taught.
Right.
And that was when I came to my crisis of belief in some of the things that I had been taught within Christianity. And
Mm-hmm.
this is not an easy thing, because Christians have hung their beliefs all these generations on these truths. I think even if we look at it, Martin Luther, when he started to translate the Bible, he even had, I mean, I don't like using him as an example because he also became a major anti-Semite at the end of his life. But all that to say is he was starting to uncover things, and it caused great consternation within the church at that time, and what he was finding. And of course, that's why the Protestant religion was birthed, and
Absolutely.
started to separate from the Catholic Church, because this is what people don't realize, is a lot of the teaching that we hang our hats as truth, biblical truth, came out of the time of Constantine. And even when I was a young girl, I was told, being raised Catholic, you can't read the Bible because you can't understand it. You're not smart enough. You're not intelligent enough. You have to leave that to your priest.
Right.
The priest will interpret the scriptures for you. But Martin
Right.
Luther, he got a hold of those scriptures, and he started seeing things that were not biblical. And
Right.
he
Right.
challenged it.
But unfortunately, the reform, or the reformists, and the Protestant, movement of reforming Christianity didn't go far enough, because, and I would dare to say majority, but I could be wrong, but I really would dare to say the majority of the Protestant denominations are also into replacement theology, and Christianity is the new Israel, and therefore God,
That's right.
broke his covenant with the Israelites, his eternal covenant, because that's what God called it. And so they didn't go far enough, unfortunately. But you know what? Even in Martin Luther's day, there weren't a whole lot of people who were educated in Latin. There weren't a whole lot of people who were reading the scriptures for themselves, even if they had the ability to. They simply, again, went to church, listened to their pastor, their priest, or whatever, and believed, what they were taught in the catechism and stuff like that. So they weren't doing their own research and studying on their own, or with somebody that they trust, and
Right.
and then figuring it out for themselves, what they choose to believe and whom they choose to believe. But you know what? Because of the internet, that's available today to everybody who has the internet.
No excuse, no excuse. And I want to use this opportunity to just let our audience know, if you want to learn more and study from the Hebraic perspective, we'd love to invite you to join us. PJTN has a Saturday night Bible study that we do here in the US, and also Australia. And then we have a Bible study with South Africa and other African countries on Sundays at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. And we'd be delighted to have you. Just send us an email at info@pjtn.org. Yaffa, we haven't even gotten through all the scriptures. You obviously are going to have to come back. I so appreciate you really taking the time and helping us to break this down, and help us to, because we are people of faith. We want to be true to the text of scripture of Torah. We don't want to buy into disinformation. That it's disinformation, biblical illiteracy, that is fueling the anti-Semitism within Christians today. And ladies and gentlemen, this is why what we're sharing with you is so important. You can't put your faith in any man. We are told in the scriptures, trust no man. The only person we can trust is God. And the only thing we have to connect us to God is his word, his Torah, the writings, the prophets. We have to be able to back everything up in what he spoke to Moses and to his prophets. So,
right. And what you just said about trust no man is Psalm 146. I also recommend people read Psalm 145, because it says in there on verse 18, it has God say that, or the psalmist says that God is near or close to all who call him, to all who continuously call upon him, ba'emet, in truth or in sincerity. All. And the other thing to understand is, just like Jesus never said he was God, Jesus never said anybody who doesn't believe in that is going to hell. That's also Roman. They used fear on the one hand to convince people to adopt the theology of the Nicene Creed, and they also used the point of the sword, that if people weren't going to do that, they were going to be slaughtered, and that also happened.
right.
So that was when church and state were together. And thank God in the United States, we also have this in Israel as well, church and state are not together. People have the right and the freedom of religion, the right to study on their own and believe as they choose. But that goes for everybody, including the Jewish people, the Unitarian Christians, the Noahides, everybody, okay, to study and learn on their own, or again with a teacher that they respect and value. And by the way, people can join me on X also. And we have a group now that we've started for people who want to learn how to do this and how to join this movement of encouraging people not to try to change their beliefs. That's not who we are. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to help people to learn how to study on their own, okay, and have access to the resources that are out there. Like there's a great resource of the Hebrew Bible, translating line for line the Hebrew text into English properly. Okay, so we have that to offer people. So if anyone who wants to join what we're doing on X and trying to help people to learn this stuff, they can write me an email or through you get in touch with me, however you want to do that. Because we need a lot of people doing this. We need a lot of people helping folks to understand the difference between Pauline Christianity and Roman Christianity that came later. It's very, very important to distinguish between those two.
Right. So you won't be deceived, ladies and gentlemen, by what Tucker and Candace are saying.
Right.
Because they've fallen for these lies and this disinformation, and this is what separates them from true people following the Word of God and true people of faith. So, Yaffa, tell us how we can reach you, how our audience can reach you.
Okay, so on email, it's Batya, shortened form of my name, YAFF, and then BATYA at yahoo.com. And on X, they can find me at Batya with an @ in front. That's my handle on Twitter or X. And would love to work with a lot more people. We've, again, started this WhatsApp group to coach people and to produce more coaches. This is going to expand. We're going to have B'nai Nusim involved all over the world. We're going to have Spanish groups and groups in Spanish and Portuguese and Italian and French and literally globally all over the world talking about all these things.
Very exciting. Very exciting.
Yeah, very exciting.
Yaffa, thank you so much for taking time again, and we'll see you next time. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it. I hope you found this program informative. We're going to post this podcast on our website and all of our podcast platforms so that you can share with your family and friends. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to stand against the ungodly rising threat that is destroying this nation and other Western nations, threatening our Judeo-Christian values and promoting anti-Semitism. We cannot remain silent. God will not hold us guiltless. He warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchmen, that they need to warn the inhabitants of the city so that if any innocent blood is shed, it won't be responsible for that watchman. The watchman won't be responsible for that death. But please, we need for you to like and share this. Help us sound the alarm in your community. Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. Don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue our conversation about combating the rise of anti-Semitism and taking back local control of our communities and our children's education. I also want to remind you that if you have not signed up to become a PJTN Watchman, you can help support this mission through our award-winning documentaries and Focus on Israel programs, as well as more programs just like this one for just $20 a month. So go to our website at pjtn.org to watch our programs and listen to our past podcasts. Your generous monthly donation will ensure that PJTN remains on the front lines and in the headlines, but we can't do it without your faithful prayers and financial support. I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. God bless you and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States.
Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.